Hey. Wow, it's Saturday morning. Anyway, I'm Greg Foertsch. I'm the art director of XCOM, and I'm here to talk through how we created some of the characters. By the way, this is like dredging up dead bodies, because it's like, it's been a while since I looked at all this stuff, so I'm hoping I remember everything that went through with these, because we started on these, I think, in 97, I mean in 2007. Not 97, 2007. And so it was, it's been a little while, but I'm assuming that everybody knows what XCOM is, right? Yeah, all right, good. So just in case you didn't, I had that in there. But XCOM is a game that was done back in 1993, 94. And so ever since XCOM, there hasn't been an XCOM, right? So when we went to set about making XCOM, the biggest problem was that your best reference was a game that was 17 years old. And in some ways that's both great, and in some ways it's also not so great. So, because there was nothing like that, nothing had done what we were about to do. And so this is XCOM, as awesome as XCOM was from the art side. This is 320 by 240 graphics. And not super awesome in that sense. At the time it was great, but nowadays, there's a lot more we can do. And so as we started XCOM, a lot of the mentality that we had as a team was, what did they do? Why did they do it? Was it because of a tech restriction, or was it because of the best answer? In a lot of cases, it was a tech restriction. In some cases, it was actually because it was really actually a pretty good answer. So trying to go through and filter that was one of the hardest things we had to do. As you can see, graphics made a bit of a change from 1994 to 2007 when we started and when we ultimately shipped. So the standard was a lot higher. There was a lot more we wanted to do. On top of it, our characters weren't going to be real little all the time. They were actually you were going to get this close. Like, what we wanted to do was we wanted to leverage the emotional attachment you had for the characters you had been building up, and actually get the camera down and kind of, do what most turn-based games have not been able to do, and actually make it really immersive. Anyway, so where does it draw from? I think one of the biggest questions I got when we made XCOM was, how much have you taken from the old XCOM? Was that really an inspiration? And like I said, yeah, it was. We looked at it, I think, in a really healthy way. But the biggest thing isn't that XCOM Enemy Unknown took its cues from the original XCOM. It was more that we shared this link where we were both pulling from UFO lore. And so because of that, a lot of their answers that they came up with were answers that we would come up with. Certainly we did look at them too, but more than us sharing the link of XCOM, we shared the link that is more about the UFO lore. 1994, this is what a little gray is. This is a sectoid. I think I did a little Twitter blast the other night, and somebody told me that they were the best aliens because they were cute yet deadly. And so that was actually something we thought about when we were working on the sectoid. There were things that we want to retain, like he's a little gray, naked guy, and that he was, this is the icon for UFO lore. And again, an answer they had, one we share. So as we started, one of the things we started looking at was, how do we take this character and kind of evolve it? And we started out, and one of the things I wanted to do, we talked about size. Jake and I spent a lot of time talking about, like, what's his scale? And I think this is one of the ones where we started going off the deep end. Well, let's make him tall. And I'm kind of into like tall linear characters anyway. And so for me, I was like, yeah, let's do that. So this sectoid that we started with was about 7 feet tall. And if you actually look at number 6, down in the bottom left-hand corner, you can actually see some of the beings would eventually end up being ethereal. But as we were doing these, it just didn't feel right. And so we ended up coming down on number 9. Sorry, I'm trying to read from here. These were the very first sketches we did for XCOM. These may be one of the oldest pieces from when we started. This is probably from June or May of 2007. We didn't even have a team at this point. This was done by one of our now concept artists, the first guy we actually hired for the project, who was actually right out of school and contracting for us. Piero McGowan. You should look him up. He's pretty great. Anyway, and so we settled on that guy, but one of the things we realized was like maybe we were getting a little ahead of ourselves with like making him 7 feet tall. It just didn't feel right. It felt kind of strange. So my phone call to Piero was, hey, let's shrink him down to about 4 feet, and then let's make him a little emaciated. Let's give him that big belly from the original one a little bit. Let's make him look like he's kind of got a swollen abdomen, and really kind of push the sinewy feel of him. But again, you know, we're really going for those almond eyes, that gray feature. Like this is our version of, you know, the iconic little gray. And so you can see at the end of the day, after we tried all that stuff, where we came down was really not that far from where the original XCOM came down. That brought us to the next character, the muton. And so this was a particular favorite of mine because I didn't think that a guy in a green unitard was particularly scary. So he's got that posture though, he's got those fists. But when we started thinking about him, the things that I really wanted to pull from, and again, he's not as iconic of a character as Little Gray, right, the sectoid, but the things that I responded to with him were his green color and his purpley pink face. And so those were the two things that we were really going to stick with. And so we started exploring him, and he went through some phases where he was actually like a pro wrestler kind of thing. And then we settled down where it was like he didn't feel primal enough. He felt like a pro wrestler, right? And so we went with more of this apish feel and this apish posture. And again, the second one from the left is the one that I kind of responded to the most. And we started pushing that, with the back view being the bottom right. And we started coming down there. And the idea with him was, you know, he's really sort of an orc. I mean, you know, he's your soldier foil. And so we were really pushing that, but I wanted to push the tribalness of him. Again, that's where the tattoos and the pinkish skin come from. And then, you know, we pushed it even forward a little bit more with, you know, again, we retained the green armor and really pushed hard on him. And so, but again, we wanted to get that posture. So it wasn't a human standing up, but he was kind of gorilla-like. So then we went into the armor, and because that was a little too noisy, and trying to get established what the alien look really was. And the muton armor, this really keyed everything for how we developed our alien language. And so I kind of described it at the time as like an organic Art Deco, like it's got repetitive flowy lines that kind of move throughout the armor. And this was really what we latched onto for doing UFOs and for doing alien base and all that stuff. And then we kind of went through and had to get that head a little different. And so one of our concept artists went in and he'd done this drawing, and I just sort of, as soon as I saw it, it was the muton. And what I loved was the soullessness in the eyes and that blank kind of feeling that you get with him. And from that we put it all together, and this is really the final concept that we came down on with the muton. And he turned out absolutely great. And there's so much that happens in that animation of him. I was actually looking at the model of him, and he almost looks like a little plushie. You know, he's kind of like a teddy bear. But when you pose him, he's just so intimidating. And so that's the final in-game character. Again, the difference of 17 years or more, and versus the original game. But again, you can tell the pink skin, the green suit, like that was the thing we were really keying off of. And then the floater. This is everybody's favorite. So, you know, with the original XCOM, there were some really common tropes that they played to. One of the things, if you've got a bad guy, he's got a cape, or horns, or he's got shoulder pads. And so the floater has two of those things. He's got the horns and the cape. And so when we really started looking at this guy, we actually took a pretty close take on him, although we didn't really want to do the cape thing because it seemed a little strange. And the original guy actually looked kind of like that. And then that didn't feel right. He really couldn't get the cover well because he was too long. And so we ended up going with this, which is much more, I think, a little more original than what we had the first time. And you know, again, it's got the little floaty ball piece. Like we retained that. We wanted kind of to keep some of the things that made sense with him, and you know, his flotation device, and then put the jets on him, and this was where we came down on, which we felt was like a pretty unique feel for him. And again, the final in-game versus the original version. Again, you can see, you know, we wanted to have that pink skin on him as well, and then push the cybernetic stuff a little bit harder. Chrysalid. So this was the most intimidating character that came up. When we were originally looking at him, you know, there was, I think, an IGN article or something, or PC Gamer, where he was like the scariest character of all time, right? And again, he's terrifying. Like, you see him on the board in the original game, he's gonna, you know what's gonna happen. And so while he was sort of the most intimidating in that sense, approaching him, he was also probably the easiest character we did. We were working on something else, and there was a sheet came in, and there was one silhouette that didn't fit, sort of like the sectoid images. And it was like, this one image doesn't work. And as soon as we saw it, both Jake and I were like, that's the chrysalid. And so he never really changed from that drawing. But some of the things that we really wanted to key off of with him is, you know, he's a little bit crab-like, and there's that just crazy expressionless face. You know, those eyes are super important to him. And so as we started approaching him the same way, that's why this is kind of why the silhouette worked. The original silhouette we got was in the bottom there, that next to the soldier. And again, as soon as we saw that was the chrysalid. And then we went about kind of like trying to pull that expressionless face and those eyes into the chrysalid. But this character was pretty much developed. I mean, he was kind of a one-shot. Like, as soon as we saw him, I don't think we ever really had any choice but to make him the chrysalid. And then the biggest thing about the chrysalid is, well, how do you make him do all the cool stuff he's got to do? And so we actually did a sheet of how he ruptures from a human once you've been impregnated. And so my concept artist didn't have any fun with this at all. But it was trying to find a way where we could get this thing to burst. There's a huge moment in the game. It's kind of cool. Definitely an art opportunity. And so, you know, my concept artist dove in, and again, this is Piero's work, and totally made it happen. As soon as we saw this, we're like, we got to do this. I also had animators offering to wash my car to do this as well. And so that's where we came down. This is the chrysalid now versus the previous one. You'll notice we do a lot of little glowy bits on our characters, and it's not so much that I'm a fan of glowy bits, but like, it really helps to make the characters read in the game, especially a game that has a lot of night missions. And so, you know, we do kind of push that a little bit, but again, I think you can see the kind of like that blank. He doesn't have the smile, but he's got that blankness in the face that we really wanted. And the cyberdisk. This is actually my personal favorite. It's the simplest character from the way it looks, but when we describe this one, a lot of times when we start a character, the designers, Jake or Nanda or whoever it is, will actually give what I'll get as a sheet, and it describes what the character does. One of the nice things is with having had the original XCOM, even as old as it was, we had a nice list of like, okay, this character would do this sort of thing, even if those got tweaked or changed a little bit, we at least had the right vector for where to go. And so with the cyberdisk, he was always described as sort of like a clown car. You know, like, we wanted to have him have this one look and then this other look that was completely different. And so as we approached him, the biggest thing was, how do you make such a simple character also be so complex? And so as we started with I keep wanting to say Sectopod. As we started with the cyberdisk, it was really like, what were we doing along the surface of this mirror-like silver disk, right? And so trying to cut these panels up and have some surface interest, but then also, you know, keep it really simple to create that extreme end of when it opens up. And so this was the initial sheet that we started with him. And we started looking at some different stuff and how does he actually open and what's inside. And then that's, you know, what he is closed, right? But then he opens into that. And so how we got all that stuff stuffed inside of those two little discs. I don't know. The magic of rigging. Our rigger is wandering around here too today. But yeah, absolutely genius stuff trying to get all this stuff. There's so much stuff that comes out of this character and how it all compacts down. And the grenade throw is like one of my favorite things. So, but yeah, probably my favorite character in the game. Which brings us to the Sectopod, when I kept talking about the Sectopod. This was another one that was pretty cool. I don't know if did anybody ever see the initial pitch movie that we did, like with the giant Sectopod coming out of the barn? We originally kind of wanted him to be large. There were some issues with that. And so we really went full circle. This is a character that we went over and over with. Like he was, 2 stories tall at one point and, this giant, just robotic mess of parts. And then we kept going back and forth and kind of changing and adjusting as the design for this character changed. And he was probably like the last alien that we ended up doing. And so as that was happening, he kept changing and evolving. So we have this giant, tall robot, like Iron Giant kind of almost. And then at the end of the day, I ended up back in the same posture. I don't want to know how much money I spent wasting time chasing around on this. But anyway, at the end of the day, we ended up with basically what was the same sort of posture as the original and hopefully a little scarier. But he walked sort of the same and sort of had the same mechanics. And it really wasn't something I set out to come back to, but at the end of the day, when we concepted him, after we started with that, we usually look at the initial idea, but this character took, a couple years to actually evolve. I was kind of like, wow, I pretty much ended up making a very similar character. But again, I think in a lot of ways that's good. It shows that some of their ideas were actually really right on. And so that one ended up being our Sectopod and the Ethereal. So this guy is uber evil because he has a hood, he's got shoulder pads, and he's got a cloak. And I mean, the Ethereal is so cool. This is such a great character. Again, we kind of wanted to steer away from the shoulder pads, but like I love that vacant hood and that giant like negative space in his head. And so as we approached him, we started pushing that. And again, like I said, back in the sectoid, there's a little hint of what he is because, we wanted this guy to be really elegant and really long and not super physically imposing, but we also wanted him to be scary. And so as we started looking into him, we ended up with this hooded, sort of metal helmeted hood of a character. Again, the red robes we wanted to key off of. We actually wanted to keep all that, but we felt like we needed to figure out what's underneath, right? And so where we had settled is the two characters on the right, your right, or my right, sorry, the two over here. And then, well, what happens underneath? Like he's not just like this hovering creature. We needed some sort of physical manifestation of him as well. And so we started looking at what is his body like. And so again, really thin, really elegant. Again, going back to all that stuff, I started with the very first concept from the game that seemed to be a little more what the Ethereal was. You've got now what's underneath of his clothes is all figured out and kind of how that works and what's in there and how that was, along with the robes and the hooded sarcophagus sort of like mask. And that's the final in game with the original one. So again, didn't really end up all that far off. Sort of intentional, sort of not intentional, and pretty close. So vehicles. Just to touch on those a little bit. One of the other things I think is a really big point for UFOs, we went back and forth. Our game is sort of based on grid, right? So one of the problems you have with grid is how do you get a disk on a grid, right? And so the disk is really important from again a UFO point of view. Your first UFO has to be a saucer, right? Like it can't be square. And so it presented a lot of really weird challenges. And so when you look at the original one, it's actually a little plus. And again, not setting out to necessarily recreate the original, but looking at what they did, we went back and forth on this. And from a design point of view, it's got to be a plus or it's got to be a square. that doesn't float well with me. So I'm trying to get things round and make them look like a disk. And so as we approached this, we came up with the design of the UFO, and again, that's pretty close, right? But what we did was I actually made the bottom of the UFO the disk, and we made these fake visual walls. All they serve is really a visual purpose. Those little like force fieldy kind of energy things, which you also picked up in the Firestorm, right? To round off and make a disk. But ultimately what's underneath of there is exactly what you need to gameplay-wise to make the game more playable. And then that's the final. But again, it's actually kind of a plus. But that was probably my happiest art moment in the game, was when I actually got a disc in for the UFO, because your first UFO, just like your first alien you encounter, has to be a gray. Your first UFO has to be a disc. And so that's what we did. So then the Skyranger. This one, producers like to joke that this cost tons and tons of money. They may or may not be right. So Skyranger was another one that was really tough because XCOM is all about your soldiers, and they're all different, and they rotate through and they die all the time. And so to me, the Skyranger was like next to the Hologlobe, the Skyranger is sort of like the icon for XCOM. And so when we started out, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what this was. And the biggest problem was that originally, there was a lot of design shift on this. Like, is it in the gameplay space? Is it not the gameplay space? And so originally it had a bunch of soldiers, and it also had to be in the gameplay space. So it had to be sort of a building. And so as we approached this, this had no offensive capability. So we wanted to keep this more like a bus, more like a whale, kind of like shape-wise. The shape design of this was going in that direction, and we wanted to make sure it was clearly not the interceptor, right? And so we started doing these drawings. These are a few of the early drawings of just how kind of out there we were with it. And again, you can see that bussish sort of people moving sort of shape design to it. And then the biggest thing is it also has to traverse the world in minutes, right? And so ultimately it's not really going to be able to fly. And so but you've got to try to make something that's sort of believable. So we ended up coming down more on this one. This was pretty much where we settled early in the game. The biggest problem, again, it's in the gameplay space. What do I do about the wings? The wings are now in the gameplay space. They're getting in the way of soldiers. Like, how do I traverse around them? How high do they have to be to get under them? Can aliens get under them? Lots of issues that we had with that. But we had some ways that we were trying to work it out. Had the wings that rotated vertically, so they turned into basically a wall, and that would work in the gameplay space. But again, a lot of the form had to follow what the function needed to be in the gameplay space. But my job is about finding tricks, right? Like, how do I work around that issue and come up with a solution that satisfies visually as well as design? And so we ended up even going back to this one. Like, so we switched gears here, and now we had a thing where the dropship opened in the front. Didn't have a driver, didn't have anything, it just opens. And so trying to get only a portion of it into the gameplay space. So we were playing around with this, and it was kind of crazy. It actually opened. We actually built this one, and it didn't look super cool, and it didn't work great. And then the more we thought about it, I think we reduced soldier numbers at this point for the scale of the game, and so it didn't have to be quite as big. And so we kind of also decided, like, well, maybe it doesn't have to be in the gameplay space at some point, but at this point it still is. So my solution was we actually retract the wings instead of having them this way, because they were taking up too much real estate in the map. So we actually rotate them back, which is a feature that stayed in the final design of the ship. So being super unhappy with all the solutions I had at this point, for one reason or another, I sent all my concept guys off to spend 2 hours just brainstorming. Like, just go make some sketches and come back. So I stopped everybody, and they started working. And one of our concept artists at Firaxis sang, who was kind of like just helping me out. He was on another project. He did it, and this is what he came up with. So there's this little drawing that I get, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's actually kind of cool. And so you can again see the wings that retract for getting in the base and taking up less gameplay space on the map. And then the final design, which we ended up coming down on, which is very similar to the original, even to the point where I actually added, the nice yellow trim to it, and it actually even has the same call number as the original one. But yeah, we ended up landing fairly close. I didn't actually even realize how close we landed on this when we had done, when we did our announcement with Game Informer. They came in to see us, and I had realized at that point when I was looking, I'm like, wait a minute, we actually are pretty close to the original. We actually ended up painting this image to kind of show how close we were for that. So yeah, we really didn't end up in much of a different place. So at the end of the day, the dropship is on the map. The wings retract. It's kind of out of the way, but it takes up a little less footprint, so we can fit it in different places. And then the interceptor. So this was the last vehicle we really had. This was the original one. Again, we kind of looked at this, and then we disappeared into concept land on it, and we ended up coming down here. So once we had looked at the original, we kind of just put it away and we stopped thinking about it. And this is where we ended up. And again, had to have vertical takeoff and landing, just like the dropship, for gameplay reasons. And we went back and forth a little bit on how would that work, but this is where we came down, and that's the final design. And again, as Game Informer had come in, I wasn't so sure. I was like, wait a minute, that looks a lot like the original one, like the two wings split in the back and everything. And sure enough, we're actually pretty close. But again, sort of a happy accident that we ended up that close, I think. And that's it. So anyway, hopefully that was fun.